I'm all yours.
And hello, everybody. Welcome to the Cbtu Detroit Political Action Workshop broadcast. We are honored to have an amazing man with us. For those who may not know me, my name is Michael Joseph. I'm the president of the Detroit chapter of Cbtu. And our special guest, and I welcome him on behalf of our entire membership here in Detroit, really of all of Region 7. And my co-host here, Phil Holyfield, our second vice president, is here with us. But we have the man himself, Supreme Court Justice of Michigan, Richard Bernstein. Welcome, sir.
Oh, I'm delighted to be here. Thank you so much for doing this program. It's such a great program. And all I can tell you is, you give me a good energy, a good spirit, a good vitality. And this is something that I have really been looking forward to participating in.
Oh, thank you, sir. And I've got to do a disclaimer, everybody. I've been knowing Judge Bernstein for many, many years. As a matter of fact, he and I were talking before the program. I was blessed to present him with a Martin Luther King Legacy Award that he so richly deserved. Judge Bernstein, Martin Luther King, when we say that name, what does that mean to you?
Oh, you know what? What an extraordinary individual. I got to tell you something. It allows you to realize that there are certain people that really live their lives to make life better for other people. There are certain people that realize that they're part of something bigger. They're part of something grander, that they're part of just a magnificent plan, and that they're willing to make the absolute sacrifice in order to enhance and make life better for other people. And I'll tell you, you know who else is someone that I just have so much admiration for, in addition to Martin Luther King, but someone else that I just so admire is Nelson Mandela. And the reason that, I have so much admiration for Nelson Mandela is he embodies everything that is good about a leader. He literally embodies everything that you want a leader to be. A person who was steadfast, a person that had resolve, a person who was able to face struggle, a person who dealt with torture. But then, after all of that sacrifice he went through, he was able to forgive. And he set a tone that allowed for others to forgive. And it's interesting, if you talk to so many people who study Africa, especially South Africa, they would say that but for Nelson Mandela, you would have had violence in the streets. And his tone and his willing to forgive was ultimately what allowed for the country to move forward in the most remarkable fashion. That ability, just think about it, that ability to face the kind of torture and struggle that he had to go through, and at the same time, being able to show forgiveness and mercy to allow for a country to move forward. Really, I can't imagine a person that has greater character or qualities than Nelson Mandela, Martin Luther King. And one other thing about Nelson Mandela that I just have so much admiration for is, and I think you see it with Martin Luther King too, but looking at Nelson Mandela, he was a person you could tell that he was in it for something where all he wanted was for a better life for those that he served. And
let me interrupt you for 1 minute and ask
yes.
you, and hearing the descriptions of those two great Americans, or one African and one American. So why are you running again? You've already been through the grind. You've been, you elected in 2014, I believe, and you've been there. Why are you running again? Why should we vote for you again?
Well, I think that's a great question. I got to tell you, I'm really enjoying this interview because that is an excellent question. I think when you ask people, when you're looking for what it is that goes into being a good public servant, what it really comes down to is you have to have a love for people. That's really what it is. At the end of the day, it really comes down to people. And if you want to do this for the right reasons, you do it because you have a love of people. And that's the thing that I happen to love about an election is that it requires you to go all across the state And I happen to love doing it. That's the thing that we take pride in, crisscrossing the state, going to every county, going to every city, going to every town. There's nothing more exhilarating than having the opportunity to spend time with people. And I think anybody that wants to kind of serve in this position does so because they really just have a love and an affinity for people. They want to make life better for people. They care about people. But if you do this, you do this because you truly love people. And I think it goes back to your kind of first question, which is, so what are the qualities that go into being a Supreme Court justice? What are the qualities that go into being any kind of public servant? And I think that really, like, what you tend to find when you're looking for those qualities is it really comes down to, and I believe this wholeheartedly, I believe it comes down to living with a sense of struggle, living with a sense of adversity, living with a sense of pain, living with a sense of feeling what it's like to be left out or discriminated against. I
Well,
think when you
let
go
me
through
ask
life
you
with
now.
those qualities,
Excuse me, sir, for interrupting, but
of
you've
course,
been there for 8 years. So
yes,
tell us, what has been your the 3 point question? What
sure,
were your biggest surprises when you first came elected that you expected and didn't see?
sure.
And what have been some of your successes? And what have been some of the failures or things that you were disappointed that you couldn't get done?
I think it's a wonderful question. I mean, these are great questions. I think candidly, when you look at this in terms of what was some of the surprises, is that, I was the first blind Supreme Court justice here in the state of Michigan. And I actually think that that allowed for the court to function much better because like we were talking about in the beginning, it gave a sense of what it means to be different, what it means to have to struggle, what it means to face adversity. And when you have that quality, you have that understanding, you have that appreciation, it allows for you to have an impact on the system overall. It allows for you to basically make changes that can allow for the system to be a little bit more sensitive, a little bit more understanding, a little bit more cognizant of the struggles and the hardships and the challenges that those who come before the system have to face and contend with each and every day. I think that what I would say is the thing that you think about when you look at this position is just the unbelievable impact that it has on people's lives. It's interesting. I'm sure, talk to all different types of folks who are running for all different types of positions. But the Supreme Court really has some of the most profound impacts on the way that people here in Michigan ultimately live. And it goes from basically dealing with the significant cases. Of course, all cases are significant, but I mean, like, the high profile cases that everybody reads about, like the question of abortion and elections and things of that sort, which are the cases that, people are familiar with because they're in the spotlight and everybody reads about it. But really, where the impact is felt by the court is that every Wednesday, there are 25 cases that we're responsible for. Think about that. Every week, there are 25 cases that we as justices are ultimately responsible for. And when you look at these cases, I'll point to one in particular that really, all the cases have an effect, but there are certain cases that when you look at it, you say to yourself, as hard and as challenging and as difficult as this job is, this is the case that makes it worthwhile. This is the case that goes to your question as to why do we keep doing it? Why run for a second term? Why go through all this? Why is it that we do this in the first place? Like, what is it that allows for us to do this kind of work and face these kind of challenges? And there's a case that, you can look up that I think really explains it. It was the Johnson-Scott opinion, and I actually wrote this opinion. And the defendants, again, were Johnson and Scott, two separate defendants. But these were two young African-American men who were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for murder. But when our office got the case and we kind of dug into it, we just came to the conclusion that it just wasn't right. There were a number of problems with it. There were a number of issues that needed to be looked at. And I think when you look at that case and you come to realize that, we were able to write the opinion that gave these two men their freedom. Now, ultimately, they spent 18 years in prison. So, their lives are, for all intents and purposes, never going to be the same. But at least if you're able to say that you made life a little bit better, you allow for them to basically become exonerated, to get their freedom, that allows for you to kind of keep going and saying to yourself, you know what, you can never really make the system, perfect or better, but at least in this situation, you can say to yourself, there's two people who are not in prison any longer and who now have their freedom. And that notion that you're able to allow for two innocent men to have their freedom really is what gives you the impetus and the energy and the strength.
Well, that
and
kind of circles
the
up, sir, with my next question, and I know we're getting to the end of our interview,
Sure.
so
Oh, I could keep going forever because I'm enjoying
I
it.
know I enjoy talking with you, and I
I'm
know our
really
audience does
into it.
too. But my question ties into what you just said. Too many people are denied meaningful access to the criminal and civil justice system because they can't afford a lawyer or
Mhm.
or a good lawyer, just getting a court appointed. So what are the biggest challenges that you see the Supreme Court faces dealing with things like that, and how would you deal with it? How would you help people? I know you just described that one particular case, but as the Supreme Court as a whole.
That's an excellent question. I think what it really comes down to is the fact that you have a situation where ultimately, when somebody is charged with a crime, the government has unlimited resources.
Yes.
So once the government decides to charge you with a crime, think of their resources. They have the police, they have the federal authorities, the state authorities, they have all these resources. And ultimately, I think when you look at what happens to so many defendants, it's you have a lot of attorneys who are in this field who really do good work because they're passionate and they care about it and they're really dedicated to the cause. But at the end of the day, they might have 200-300 cases. So it just becomes an unmanageable situation where ultimately, they just have so many cases that they have to handle. And it's not just about the attorney, it's about the fact that, in a criminal defense case, if you want to conduct your own investigation, right? So ultimately the police can conduct an investigation, the state can conduct an investigation, the feds can conduct an investigation. But ultimately, if you're going on trial and your life is in the balance, you might want to conduct your own investigation. You might want to review the
Let
evidence.
me ask you, sir, with this in reference to what you're saying, Supreme Court, about the backlog that's happening now because of with COVID, of course, people were not
Yes.
able to meet. Your opinion, does it make a difference if you're going to meet in person and
Oh,
some of your
I'm so glad
comrades
you
who you
asked that
should,
question.
yeah.
Oh, I'm so glad you asked that question. This
And
is
and,
something.
and and as you do answer that question, 'cause we're going to be wrapping up in a moment. Also,
Okay,
you can talk about the Court Justice All Task Force as well.
sure.
Did it affect?
So, court has to be in person. That's absolutely critical because think about it. If you are waiting for your day in court, you've been waiting, whether it's a civil day, you've been waiting, for your day in court, whether it's a civil matter or whether a criminal matter, you've been waiting for years to have your big moment, to have your big day. Do you want to do it on Zoom? You're an attorney, you've gone to law school, you're passionate about arguing. Do you want to make your arguments on Zoom? I mean, your day. This is your day. Of course, it has to be in person. There are certain situations where, ultimately you can do things via Zoom. But I think the real question comes down to what is the default? Is the default in person or is the default on Zoom? The default should always be in person. The accommodation can be on Zoom when and if necessary. But that in person is absolutely critical. But I just, I really want to keep going back to this, because this is such a great conversation. But when you look at the Supreme Court and when people ask themselves, so why do I care about it? Why should I vote for it? Why is it significant? Why does it matter? Why is it relevant? I was given the opportunity to write the Flint water case. And that was a historic decision. Because as what we had in Flint was over 150,000 people were ultimately poisoned. And I was given the opportunity to write the opinion that allowed for them to have their voice get heard, that said that you matter, that you have a constitutional voice, to be heard, to have your grievances aired. That's the kind of stuff when you have the chance to write an opinion that basically affects 150,000 people. That's the significance of the Supreme Court. One last very quick issue, right? Environment. I wrote the opinion that dealt with the environment on a critical issue, and it dealt with the Rouge plant, and they had put up a new smokestack, and there was soot coming from that smokestack, and it was basically polluting the entire neighborhood, the schools and the homes. And the question was, what role, what right does the community have in the administrative process? And my opinion said, folks that live in communities that are going to be affected by their water, by their air, by all these types of things, they have a right to be heard. They have a right to be recognized, and they have a right to be a part of that process. And ultimately, that opinion is going to carry through all the different communities and all the different places across the state. So the key thing is that the emphasis that I just really want to put on this is that you've got two great candidates that are running for this position, Bernstein and Bolden, Bernstein and Bolden, Bernstein and Bolden. But this is the most critical thing. The biggest challenge we have is that people don't finish their ballots. And if there's one message that we need to send out, it's that when Democrats go to vote, make sure that you go to the nonpartisan section of the ballot and you vote for Bernstein and Bolden.
And vote. Well, sir,
really quick, this is the real problem, but this is really an important point that's really, really critical, absolutely critical. What is happening is that people vote and they say, okay, I'm going to vote straight Democratic. They vote straight Democratic, and this happens every year. They come back and they say, hey, I voted for you. And at the end of the day, they haven't, they didn't. And ultimately, the reason that we lose the Supreme Court is primarily because Democrats don't finish their ballot. So you just have to remember, vote Democratic, and then after you finish voting Democratic, you have to go to the nonpartisan section of the ballot.
Turn the ballot over. Well, sir, I'm gonna have to wrap up. Unfortunately, I always enjoy having a conversation with you. Your label connection, I'm looking at your endorsement, your UAW, Michigan Education Association, United Association Local 3835, SEIU, Michigan Building and Construction and Trade. The labor loves you, sir. And you have this great relationship with labor. We appreciate you. And we want all of the folk to have opportunity to hear you so they can make a decision to take you back to the Supreme Court, or maybe they won't. But we know that they had an opportunity to hear you speak, sir. And we thank you for taking time out in our program. So I'm gonna leave you with a closing thought. Everybody, please pay attention to what he said. You go to our Cbtu website, to our Facebook page, you'll see information on where your balloting stations are, how to fill out an absentee ballot, make sure you fill it out completely and correctly. And like the Supreme Court Justice just said, make sure you turn that ballot over and vote for everybody on there, not just a Democrat or Republican, but it's nonpartisan. But sir, we're going to give you your final thoughts to our audience.
Just remember, Bernstein and Bolden. Bernstein and Bolden.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for being on the program today.
You bet. God bless you. Bye now.
God bless you, sir. Good to see you again. Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for watching. We'll be back with more information on the candidates and the issues. I'm Michael Joseph, president of the Detroit chapter of Cbtu, along with our second vice president, Phil Holyfield. We say, thank you for watching.